Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be here with my husband Steve and we're going to be talking all things squat mechanics. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going to be talking about common errors that beginners make while learning to squat, whether it's body weight or if you're starting to progress to weight. So first, what you might see is someone going down into a squat and them shifting and their heels coming up off the ground. So something to look at might just be an overall patterning issue where we want to sit the hips back, but it could also be a lack of ankle motion coming forward. So something that we would look at would be putting some weights underneath the heels to take that out. If you notice your squat improve with this, then it's most likely ankle motion. If you're still coming forward, then it's probably more a patterning problem. So if you are noticing some ankle motion issues, and that did seem to correct it, then Steve is going to show us some things that we would potentially do in the clinic to help that, and then we'll show you some things that you can do on your own at home.
So commonly in the clinic, we'll do ankle mobilizations. There's a few different joints you can target. So you have the talocrural joint. We can just do distraction, or we can mobilize it in an anterior-posterior direction, which just kind of matches how the joint glides. You can kind of assess side by side if you notice any difference, but especially if it's a pattern that you're seeing it on both sides and it's stiff on both sides, no surprise. You know, if you don't have a specific injury and you're just getting back into the swing of things, it's very common that it is a bilateral issue or both side issue. So this is kind of what I'll do to work on that. And then one of the biggest things is to test it and then retest it. So immediately afterwards, we would ideally go back, do the same thing, see if it makes a change or not, and say that does or doesn't work. Then we'll maybe look at a different joint. So we have a subtalar joint as well. Down here, you could even look at the foot, but then other things would lead to maybe considering soft tissue structures as well. So you have obviously your gastroc and your soleus, so those are probably the big players there. Soft tissue techniques, and we could do massage. Dry needling is something we do frequently in the clinic as well. There's a million of those techniques, and to be honest, it's very simple to do a lot of those at home, maybe not the dry needling yourself. Those would be the main structures we'll try to address right now with some exercises that you can do on your own.
So for the banded self-dorsiflexion mobilization that you can do at home, you can take a band. I personally prefer a smaller band. Steve here typically prefers a thicker band. Rule of thumb is you want to stay underneath the two ankle bones on your side. You're going to have, because the angle of the joint kind of goes down a little bit this way, you want to match that angle of the joint as you rock forward. So if you don't have anything to anchor it at home, you can put your foot up on a bench, and then you're just essentially leaning forward, getting a good stretch through that ankle, keeping the heel down on the ground. You can also do it the way Steve is doing it, with the band anchored down and the foot is behind you, working that knee coming, translating over your toe. And again, you always want to reassess. If you do that, kind of hang out there for like 30 seconds, maybe do a couple rounds of that on each side, and then you can retest your squat and see if that helped. For a soft tissue technique, you can take a lacrosse ball or tennis ball, and you're going to find a tender spot somewhere along the calf there. And you can then bring your foot up and down, or use a strap and pull your toes that way, or grab your hand and pull as well, keeping your knee nice and straight. As you can see, Steve's hamstrings are also very tight. Or you can just roll it along the back of the calf as well, just to kind of help loosen that up. And then again, retesting your squat after you hang out there for probably a couple minutes.
Another one you can try to do is to activate the front of your leg muscles to try to stretch the back so it's a bit more active instead of just passive. So you can kind of bend on over. As you get to a point that's starting to feel a little bit of a stretch, you can just try to alternate. It's kind of hard to do the two at a time because you might think that the balance is going to be more of an issue for you than the stretch itself and the flexibility. So I'll just kind of go back and forth and rock, just trying to keep my heel on the ground, but trying to just bring my toes and the rest of my ankle up. You can try to lock the knees out more if you want to, and that'll bring the hamstrings into play a little bit more. We can even bend down a little bit. But personally, I find the stretch just kind of getting almost like in a good deadlift position, getting around there-ish, and then alternating back and forth there.
And then you can even use like yoga blocks or something like that to put your hands on if you don't feel comfortable resting on your shins. You can use like even a chair or something like that too. So here, coming forward, knees slightly bent, and then going up and down there. So that kind of breaks down the ankle and what you can do to help that if you notice your ankles are contributing. Another thing is those knees coming forward, and that can be more of a patterning issue. So if those heels elevated didn't necessarily change your squat form, it might be more patterning. So something that we would do in the clinic, you can cue the squat a couple different ways. So something that we might do in the clinic is to sit down into a chair or bench or something like that and cue the sitting back to the surface as you stand back up. So notice the hips are hinging back first, keeping that chest up nice and tall, back is nice and flat as you sit down.
It's very common as well as you go to sit back in a chair, it's really common that you don't even use your muscles at the bottom portion of the motion. So we call them tap and goes, so to speak, where you literally just want to kind of tap the surface and come back immediately up, where you're not actually distributing any weight into the seat itself.
Another thing that we'll sometimes do if we notice someone kind of rounding forward as they sit back is use a dowel behind their back. So we can have the dowel is sitting behind the head, at the mid back, and at the low back, kind of where your hand is. And it does not necessarily matter which hand is underneath or on top. And then you're just sitting back, keeping those 3 points of contact, and then coming back up, sitting back as you go. Another way that you can cue the knees to sit back is to turn around and have, if you're using a chair, you can reach towards the back of the chair as you sit down. So keeping your knees, preventing your knees from coming past your toe, just to get the hips to work a little bit more. Bringing the knees forward long term isn't necessarily bad or anything like that, but you want to get the pattern down right first. So coming here and then coming back up, not letting your knees go past because they're blocked.
And at home, we'll frequently just have patients do this at their kitchen countertop, because that way their knees can't go past and hit through their cabinets unless they open the door, I suppose. And if it's a balance issue for a lot of people, just kind of having their body learn that center of mass, we'll actually can kind of take a towel or something like that, pillowcase, and actually slide it on the countertop forwards, just trying to not put too much weight through it as they come and sink backwards, because a lot of people, when they go to sink back like that for the first time, they kind of feel like they're falling backwards, and that'll just kind of help with the body kind of relearning how to fire the muscles with that center of mass instead of the way they're used to shifting their knees forward more.
So another common thing that we will see is what I like to call a premature butt wink, where the back starts to round as you sit down above 90 degrees. So below 90 degrees, it's okay to have a little bit of a butt wink, but if you're seeing one before 90 degrees, mobility or patterning could potentially be playing a role in contributing to that.
Depending on which resource you look at, and by resource I mean that very loosely online, you'll see that butt wink might actually be something else, where they're actually, instead of talking about the back rounding like this early, where they actually stick their butt out like this and create an arch in their back too early. And there's a different reason for both of those, and we're about to go over the difference between those two.
So for the premature rounding, it could potentially be a hip mobility issue. So if you're thinking about bringing your knee towards your chest in your squat, if it's limited, that could potentially play a role. So bringing your knee towards your chest might be a good way to assess that. If you feel it is a little bit tight or limited from side to side, or if you're not necessarily able to get up to probably about 120 degrees without letting that back arch, then it might be something to look at.
And as you saw with her squat as well, in this position, it's very normal for the back to round a little bit at a certain point. It's more about what depth does that start to happen, and there might be different structures either in the front of your hip or the back of your hip that can contribute to that.
So looking at the joint specifically, there are a couple things in the clinic that we might do to loosen that up. Steve here has the band anchored down low and is doing a self-caudal hip mobilization, essentially pulling downwards alongside the hip there. It is trying to improve the bringing your knee towards your chest. As your hip joint, it kind of goes down as the knee comes up. You can kind of oscillate at the end, or if that's a little bit too complicated, you can just hold it there as well. for a period of time, bringing it back down, and you should feel a little bit of a stretch in that hip itself. And you do want to use a heavier band for this one, just so you can provide a bit of resistance there. And then once you've done that, you also want to reassess and see if your squat has changed. Another thing that can potentially be contributing is hamstring mobility or flexibility. So if you're laying on your back, you should be able to raise your leg up. If you're not able to get up to about 70 degrees without your back rounding excessively or your knee bending, then it might be a limiting factor in your squat. So obviously some things to address that. You can do a simple pike stretch here, stretching out the back of the legs, or you can lay on your back, hugging your knee towards your chest, and then coming up, squeezing your thigh, trying to straighten out your leg, holding it there, and then coming back down.
More dynamic stretch might be just standing, kind of, we'll use these for a lot of athletes where you kind of come down, try to keep your knee fairly straight or entirely straight and just kind of scoop.
Another thing too, that can be used as a warm-up. So it's a good dynamic warm-up to loosen you up and prepare you as well.
Next we're going to talk about what some other people call the butt wink, when the back starts to arch this way or instead of round this way, it rounds this way when you are going into your squat. So usually for a lot of people it's as simple as just pattern. They just either don't know they're doing it or they just need a simple corrective just to either cue their core or drive through their hips a little bit more. So if you are just driving through your hips, it's going to be as simple as really trying to push and almost kind of corkscrew your feet into the ground as you are bringing yourself up. Whereas if the core just needs to get engaged, it might be as simple as kind of resetting that position, just controlling your inhale and exhale at the appropriate time of your squat, such as just inhale on the way down, exhale on the way up is a simple one a lot of people do. And just losing your breath and losing that core stability and pressure while you're doing it. But for other people, especially when you start to load it, sometimes it can actually be more of a weakness issue where, when a lot of people do their core exercises, they think about crunches or these dynamic movements. Sometimes you need to make it a little bit simpler than that, and not necessarily easier, but just simpler in terms of just building your body's ability to maintain that position. So get into a plank, for example, and when you get into the plank, are you arching your back like this to hold yourself up, or are you kind of keeping that engagement here and keeping a nice flat back, just like we're trying to get when we get into that squat, where we're trying to keep this flat and pretty close to parallel with the shins as well. So the other thing that can be the case sometimes as well is tightness in the chest and the mid-back as well, where this kind of is drawn forward, so your body, in order to get that center of mass right, will start to arch this ways forward as well. So simple stretches such as just, getting into doorway, stretching out this way is something we'll do for some people. She's doing now. Maybe it's as simple as getting on a foam roller.
What you can do here is you can also do some thoracic extensions where you're hinging over, opening up the chest to get a good stretch through that pec. But hopefully that helps, some quick things that you can do to help improve your squat form. If you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to drop them below. And if you found that helpful, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, as we will be going over other exercises, giving you other helpful tips and things like that. But we will see you in the next video.